All right, we've talked a lot about what some of the things that plants do for us and some of the things that we expect of them. But obviously, one of the most important things is they feed us. So here we're going to talk a little bit about plants as food and spices. They're irreplaceable as a food source, not just for us, but for the animals that we consume and that as we keep as pets and all sorts of things. So yes, we ask all of these other things on this list for plants, but the number one thing that they do for us, of course, is feed us. As we've discussed, most of our calories come from the three major crops: wheat, rice, and corn. The other comes from about 20 different plants or so. And these diets look vastly similar, or very similar, around the world. Most of the world eats about 35 different plants, roughly 15 vegetables and 15 fruits, and a little bit of variety here and there. And around the world, 94% of the calories consumed come from plant products, and the rest comes from animal products. So the vast majority of the world is actually eating a lot more plants than we do in this country. If you take a look at this, notice that 19 of the 20 top crops that we grow in this country are food sources. The only one that isn't, that's a major crop, is cotton. So while I don't want you to try to memorize what plants are from what category and those sorts of things, I want this to be more of a, let's look at all the different types of plants that we eat, and let's look at all the different types of plant parts that we eat. By far the largest group of plants that we utilize are the grasses. So most of our grain crops come from grasses. All of our sugar, those are all grasses. It's interesting that these plants, these grasses, if you were to eliminate that family, you've eliminated the vast majority of agronomic production. That's how important this family is. It's something that we eat. It's something that we put in our lawns. We use for recreation. It could be argued it is the number one most important family to human beings. But we also eat other things. We eat tubers, and potatoes are the number one tuber. I highly recommend that on your own you go and you look at what cassava, sweet potato, and yams are. Because what we often call a yam is used interchangeably with sweet potato, but they are not. Yams actually come from a plant that is more closely aligned with palm trees than it is with potatoes, which is kind of interesting. We eat a lot of different fruits. Yeah, we all know the joke that, the tomato's actually a fruit. Right? But we eat a lot of different fruits. Technically, fruits come from the pollination of a flower. So a lot of the things that we call vegetables are technically fruits, as far as the plant is concerned. But we eat, in some way, shape, or form, just about every part of the plant. Now, we don't eat every part of every single plant, but if you look at all of the different things that we do eat, we ultimately eat every single part of the plant. Lettuce is the leaves, carrots are the roots, beans are seeds, blueberries are fruits, asparagus are stems. So we eat a lot of different parts of plants. All right, so we're going to go back a little bit. We've talked a little bit about this. We know that we've domesticated plants roughly 10,000 years ago. We know that modern crops started showing up between 2,000 and 9,000 years ago, and that greatly depends upon the crop that you're dealing with. And in the last 20 to 50 years, we've seen a lot more modern breeding programs and the advent of genetic engineering in the last 30 years or so. These things are increasing yield with breeding programs, increasing yield by decreasing pest problems, by adding pesticides into the plants or pesticide resistance into the plants. We have increased nutritional value, we have increased protein content, we have increased vitamin and mineral content, and we've made these crops a lot easier to harvest. And so it's mechanically much simpler to do these sorts of things. So now what we're looking at is incremental increases in a lot of these things. I don't see, at least under current technology, massive changes happening, but incremental changes making things better and or easier. So this particular website kind of shows you what bananas look like and other fruits and vegetables look like before we got our hands on them. And this is why the process of domestication is so important. So this is what wild bananas look like. They're not as sweet. They have many seeds. The seeds are very large. It's a very difficult fruit to eat. I'm just going to kind of scroll through there. This is a painting of what watermelon used to look like compared to modern watermelon. I've seen the bananas. That's a wild eggplant. That is an eggplant growing in the wild. Somebody took a look at that and went, I can work with that. And I'm going to start breeding that. And today, modern eggplant looks vastly different. That's a wild carrot. You can actually go into our woods and dig these things up and eat them, and they sort of have a carrot taste. Don't confuse them with poison hemlock, which looks very similar, which if you eat that, you will die. So I'm not necessarily advocating wandering around in the woods and randomly picking things up to see if they're edible, but vastly different from modern carrots. That's the original corn, teosinte, versus what we have as modern corn now. So obviously, things look vastly different. That's a wild peach. That's a peach today. So if you kind of scroll through that, you'll be able to see some of the differences between modern fruits and their wild or previous counterparts. There's a lot of argument as to what paleo peoples used to eat. And maybe 10 years ago, we came up with this idea that the paleo diet is the way to go because our cavemen ancestors were so healthy. And so if we look at the paleo diet as it is today, they say a lot of lean meat, good carbs, meaning your potatoes, your rices, those sorts of things, nuts, and a little bit of fruit. Things that in theory, cavemen would have found wandering around as they were doing whatever it is cavemen did. The reality is, and I'm not going to play this, it's about a 20-minute long video, so if you want to go and watch it, it's a good TED Talk on the quote-unquote paleo diet. But basically, summarizing, it would say that Paleolithic peoples ate whatever they could find where they lived. So a group of people that lived by the sea might eat a lot of fish. A group of people that lived in a more forested area might eat a lot of plants and nuts and seeds and occasionally animals. And the people that lived on the savanna might eat a lot of grasses and animals and things like that. So they ate whatever they could find wherever they lived. So this whole concept of a diet that works for everybody doesn't exactly work because every culture has slightly different tastes and preferences and availabilities of food. So that begs the question then, why do we eat? The obvious answer is we eat to stay alive. But human beings do so much more than just eat to stay alive. If all we wanted to do was eat to stay alive, we could all eat dog food and cat food and we could be nutritionally alive. And we don't do that. We could eat the same thing over and over and over and over and over again and be nutritionally alive. And we don't do that. So why don't we do that? Well, we don't do that because we like different tastes. We like all kinds of different things. So how do we make food better? We change the flavor with our herbs and our spices. These are plants that we utilize in small quantities that allow us to enjoy the things that we eat. Now, these are chemicals that we like, but the plants didn't make them for us. We can breed the plant to make more of them, to make stronger of them, to make different flavors and things like that. But the plants initially made those things for self-defense, to prevent predation. Again, don't necessarily memorize all of the different things. Just recognize that as we look at how a plant is making these different chemicals, there are different pathways, different types of chemicals that the plants are utilizing. So if we go to make these things in a lab to synthesize different scents and different flavors, we know how the plants are doing these sorts of things. So all of these things come with different sets of flavors and excite different taste receptors in our mouths and in our nose and things like that. Because these are the 5 basic senses that we have when it comes to taste: sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and savory. Those are the 5 different things that we can taste. And some of us taste some things better than others. Some of us will have a sweet tooth. Some of us prefer salty things. And all of these things are based on our sense of smell, which is why if you get a cold, your food doesn't taste as good because your sniffer is not working as well. So a lot of these things and how we perceive them definitely comes down to how we're smelling those sorts of things. Again, This is not a memorization thing. This is a recognition that we utilize a lot of different families and different parts of different families for our herbs and our spices. So think about things like rosemary and basil and oregano, which come from the mint family. And we are utilizing the oils of those sorts of things. And think of the smells that you have when you think of mint or peppermint or spearmint, which all come from different plants. If you look at basil, which is the plant over here on the right-hand side, and you see all the dots on the underside of the leaf, those are the glands that the plant has where it produces the oils that cause basil to smell and to taste like it does. For the carrots and for celeries, the cell walls has pockets filled with these flavorful oils, and that's why celery tastes the way it does. That's why dill tastes the way it does. Technically, with celery, we're actually eating petioles. We're not even eating the stems. We're eating the petioles. So that's an interesting sort of thing. We've bred the plant to have this very large petiole. A petiole is what attaches the leaf to the rest of the plant. So we've bred that to have very large petioles. Mustards, which are actually on the right-hand side, and the nightshades, which are on the left-hand side. Things like our peppers and our tomatoes come from the nightshade family, and our mustards and things come from the Brassicaceae family. So we can take a look at all the different flavors. Think of the different types of mustards that there are, and all the different peppers that are out there, and all the different types of tomatoes that are out there. We also breed some of these things for ornamental purposes. These are all different types of ornamental peppers. These peppers weren't actually bred for their edible qualities. They were bred for their purple leaves. Happens to have red fruit on it. They were bred for these fruits to be small and round and looking like little marbles. Or they were bred to have these tiny little medusa looking little hair-like peppers. All of those are technically edible. They are peppers. Some of them are extremely hot, and some of them are more like a red pepper or a yellow pepper in terms of their flavoring, but they weren't bred for their flavoring. They happen to also still be edible. This is what pepper looks like on the left-hand side, and this is what ginger looks like. So if you've ever purchased and utilized ginger root in terms of your cooking, that's the plant that it comes from. Vanilla comes from an orchid. It's one of the few orchids that we actually eat. Now, we use orchids for decoration, but this is one of the rare orchids that we eat, and you can see here how it climbs. I took this shot at the National Botanic Garden, and they have it climbing up a wall inside one of their conservatories. So the point in all of this is to recognize that around the world we may eat very few crops relative to the number of plants that are actually edible. But if you expand into the world of herbs and spices, we actually utilize a wide variety of plant parts for lots of different things because human beings enjoy food. And plants allow us not only to just derive basic calories, but enjoyment as well. Okay, as always, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch.